Welcome to the latest episode of USC Trojans Primetime Live. I'm Matt Zemek. He's Ethan Inman. The latest on USC football, and it's the end of June. 1 week from now, it'll be 4th of July weekend. The smell of football, not yet there, but it's coming closer. And as with each passing year, I think this is a universal experience. The off seasons never feel shorter; they always feel longer with each year that you go through it. This off season, no exception. It's like it's taking forever. We're all itching to see some actual college football. So now, just about 2 months away. USC, of course, on August 30th, but you have week 0 on August 23rd. So technically less than 2 months until we tee it up for college football 2025. So Ethan, before we went on the air, we always discuss our topics, what we're going to talk about, and USC receivers getting some off-season love. That's the big thing. So talk about what you saw in the ratings, and then your reaction to that.
Yeah, so the first tweet that caught my eye was a tweet by Pro Football Focus about Makai Lemon. Let me grab a little screen share real quick so everyone can see. There we go. So essentially, they had Makai Lemon right there as number 1 on their top 10 list of receivers for the 2026 NFL draft. Obviously, it's pretty early, but you have him above some, big guys like Jordan Tyson, who's pretty well regarded, guys like that. So, pretty eye-catching when you see a tweet from Pro Football Focus with a USC wide receiver. They have Makai Lemon all the way up there at number 1. But that wasn't the only thing that I saw today. I also saw an ESPN article, which I can switch over to that really quick as well, that had Jacoby Lane at number 1. As you can see right here, again above Jordan Tyson, kind of ironic, right above Jordan Tyson. Jordan Tyson's getting ranked under a USC wide receiver both times there. But yeah, so just two different very well-regarded publications that have USC receivers at number 1. I think the other thing that's interesting to point out here is this other guy doesn't have Jacoby Lane or Makai Lemon in his list at all. And if you go back to the Pro Football Focus, which I'll share just because it's a little bit nicer to look at here, they didn't have Jacoby Lane on their list at all either. So, I mean, that's kind of part of the game. It's the offseason. A lot of people have a lot of different opinions. They're not, seeing these players hit the field yet. They're betting a lot on potential over results with both of these guys because these are guys that have shown flashes, but they're not 1,000-yard receiving guys yet, obviously. So, can't really have any secure bets yet, but I think it's still pretty exciting to see 2 really well-regarded, media companies who have covered the sport for a really long time, thinking pretty highly of these USC receivers. I think Makai Lemon to me feels like more of a sure bet to be on the top of some NFL draft boards here when next May rolls around. But I think that Jacoby Lane obviously was more dominant at times for sure. I think Makai Lemon put together more of a consistent performance, but Jacoby Lane, was really productive in the red zone and has just kind of the potential that obviously has a lot of gets people's eyeballs going. I think in the ESPN article, they ranked Jacoby Lane number 1, but then they also said that he was the toughest player to rank just because he showed so much potential, but hasn't really put together any consistency yet. So I just think it's exciting. I think, I'd agree. I think these are 2 really talented wide receivers that deserve this recognition for sure. I don't think that it's too crazy to have them on these lists. I think that they deserve it. They've shown a lot of potential. They are two guys who have the most potential in all of college football. But I do think it's also interesting to see how kind of all over the place some of these lists are. So, but yeah, what are your thoughts, Matt?
Before I give my thoughts, Ethan, we have not been getting many super chats, and keep in mind that we had a show a year ago with Tim Prangley, which, we got a lot of super chats. We had really develop something. But of course, then that got interrupted. The USC channel was basically off the air for a few months. You and I started like a month and a half ago, so like we're trying to rebuild. So Willie Permore, the $5 super chat, thank you so much. It's very generous. It's very thoughtful. Like your loyalty to the USC channel here at the Voice of College Football, very greatly appreciated, Willie. Like longtime viewer from last year's previous iteration of the show, now carrying over to the new show, and you're supporting Ethan Inman. Like I'm the old guy. Ethan's the new guy, so I take this as a sign that you really like Ethan's analysis, which I certainly do. So Willie, thanks for your show of support. We really appreciate that here at the Voice of College Football. So Ethan, my reaction is simply that when you talk about you don't have both receivers on these lists, and you have some omissions from these lists. What really stands out to me there is it might not necessarily be a verdict on how good these receivers are. It could be a verdict on Jaden Mayava. It could be a verdict on Lincoln Riley, who stunk it up as a play caller last year. This could be a lack of confidence in USC's offense overall. And we know that USC's offense is what held the program back last year. It was Alex Grinch 2 years ago, but it was the offense and Lincoln Riley last year. So I would really love, I'm not upset, okay, at anyone who omits USC's receivers from the list, because there needs to be a certain skepticism about USC's offense. Like, it's not a fully polished product. This is a prove-it season for the USC offense, for Mayava, for Riley, for the passing game. Like, something has been lost. It needs to be restored. And, we won't know for a while, right? And moreover, 2023, when the front end of the schedule was as soft as a marshmallow, it was expected that USC would be 6-0. The season was back, the schedule was backloaded. We didn't have any idea how good USC was in 2023 going into the Notre Dame game. And then you had the gauntlet, the Notre Dame, Utah, Washington, Oregon. The Trojans failed those tests. It wasn't a very good team, so there's almost zero chance USC loses one of its first 4 games. USC is going to be 4-0 almost certainly. Going into Illinois, going into that game in week 5 in Champaign, USC could be 4-0, and much like 2023, we could know absolutely zero, or at least very little, about how good this team really is. And so skepticism about this team from national pundits, yes, that's a logical posture. And I would really be interested to know if I ever had the chance to talk to these pundits, is this because this is your evaluation of the receiver himself, or it's a function and a product of the quarterback, the head coach, also the offensive line, which I haven't mentioned yet, but that obviously goes into having a functional passing game, the quarterback having enough time to find his receivers for the receivers to really matter. So I think, let me just flip that around, Ethan, and throw that back at you. When you look at those pieces of the puzzle, play calling, quarterback, offensive line, how well do you think Mekhi Lemon and Jacoby Lane can make everyone else? Mayava was willing to trust Lemon and Lane to make plays in ways that Miller Moss never did. Mayava was willing to throw the contested 50-50 ball. He trusted Lemon and Lane to go up and make plays in traffic. Miller Moss didn't do that. So I'll ask about the various angles of this as we kind of peel away the layers of the onion. But let's start with just how well can the receivers make their teammates? That, I think, would be the first thing I'd be interested in getting your take on.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, Matt. I think that, as I kind of think more about the way that these different outlets went about crafting these lists, you're talking about the NFL draft, not necessarily who's going to be the best and most productive wide receivers. You're talking about who's going to go first overall, which isn't always the same thing. And I think That's certainly an interesting point, especially with these USC receivers, because I think the pundits who went out and picked Lemon and Lane aren't, you know, are thinking the same thing that we are. They're not entirely certain that Lincoln Riley and Jade Mayava can be trusted to get their full potential out of these receivers, but that obviously doesn't ruin these receivers' NFL careers. Like NFL teams can see that too. They're not blind to that, just like these publications aren't blind to that. Like they can obviously still go on and have very productive NFL careers, even if they don't put up 1,000 yards this season. So I think that that's one end of the kind of thing to consider. Um, in terms of them carrying the offense, I think it's certainly possible. I mean, I think back to my freshman year in 2021 when I watched a lot of Drake London, and Drake London went through a lot of, crazy quarterback stuff going on with, you know, them thinking that Keaton Slovis was going to be great and then he was terrible, and then they kind of brought in Jackson Dart and he did great for a couple games, and then he was inconsistent and they weren't ready to commit to him, and then they did the two quarterback system and just all kinds of mess. But Drake London was still catching 10 balls a game and going for 150 yards. Like he was still that very productive receiver. And then I think the year after that, you had Jordan Addison, you had Caleb Williams. So Caleb Williams was a Heisman winner, but I think Jordan Addison would have thrived in the USC offense even if he hadn't have had Caleb Williams. He was just that good of a receiver. And then 2023 and 2024 is when it's kind of gotten a little bit messier, obviously. I comprised a list of all the wide receivers that have been prominent members of the USC offense in 2023 and 2024, just because I was kind of thinking about Lemon and Lane's place in the offense and who they've kind of competed with. And so I'll read that off real quick. It's Zachariah Branch, Brendan Rice, Mario Williams, Kyron Hudson, Dorian Singer, Taj Washington, Deuce Robinson, and Kyle Ford. And all of those guys were guys that like showed something at some point, but there was never a Drake London or Jordan Addison type of player, obviously. Like those were all, that's kind of who we thought Zachariah Branch was going to be. And, Brendan Rice had a really good 2023 in terms of being able to be kind of a red zone and a deep ball threat, but also wasn't very consistent. So other than those, two at very brief times, there was never really a guy who emerged as a true number one option. And I think it's interesting too to kind of think about Mekhi Lemon and Jacoby Lane sitting behind those guys. I don't really think that that's an incrimination on them. I think it's more of an incrimination on Lincoln Riley not really being able to figure out the offense and figure out what he had and figure out who he should be feeding. I mean, Zachariah Branch obviously kind of regressed this past year, but I think throughout his USC career, I was really frustrated with his usage. I feel like they should have used him a lot differently than they did. And I think that could become a problem this year. I think, and I haven't seen enough out of these receivers to, kind of fully back them as guys who are going to be dominant, even if the offensive play calling or the quarterback play is inconsistent. But what I will say is I think that they come in to 2025 as the clear number one guys. They're going to be the top two wide receivers on this team. Like I said, in 2023 and 24, I don't think there was as clear of that. There was some veterans in the room because you had guys like Taj Washington and Brennan Rice. And, there was some freshmen who showed some flashes. Like I'm sure, and I mean, we heard all the reports coming out of practice about Zachariah Branch and how incredible he was. And then he showed flashes in games. So there was a lot of guys that I'm sure Lincoln Riley saw as having the potential to be those number one and number two guys. But there, like I said, there was never a clear Drake London, Jordan Addison type of guy. And I think even though that, these guys, Mekhi Lemon and Jacoby Lane, haven't necessarily shown the Drake London and Jordan Addison type of skill, they still come into the season as these are our guys, and, whoever kind of falls in line behind them, it's just kind of the way that things have worked. The other guys who had potential to step up in Zachariah Branch and Deuce Robinson, they took off this offseason. So it kind of left those as these are the guys who are left who have been productive, who, have put together the kind of seasons that have been at least decently good to where we can trust them. I mean, Jacoby Lane had only 525 yards last year, but had 12 touchdowns, so he was a great red zone threat. And then Mekhi Lemon had over 750 yards and had several games over 100 yards receiving. So they're guys who have shown production at a level that not a lot of other USC guys have, and they've also shown potential because they put together those numbers not just on, mediocre production over the course of the season, mediocre but consistent production. It was more they had some highs and they had some lows, but their highs were really high. So I think that, to me, at least sitting from my seat where I am right now, they seem pretty clear number one and number two guys, and that will be to their benefit in terms of their productivity this season. So yeah, and that encourages me of even if the quarterback play and the coaching isn't the most consistent, they're still number one and number two option. Even the running back room too is just a little bit less certain. You have a lot of, trying to figure out who the number one guy is, whereas the last couple of years you have had that clear while the wide receiver room hasn't been as clear. So I just think the certainty will serve them well this season.
All right. Got a good point from Walter Clark here. Walter always has something thoughtful to say when I look in the chat and he makes a comment. If Lincoln Riley and QB are so bad, why are Lemon and Lane being mentioned as top receivers? Very solid point, Walter. I would say, Walter, in response to that, and this kind of develops our discussion, and I'll ask for Ethan's take on this, but I think a natural place to start is a former USC quarterback, now in the NFL, Sam Darnold in Minnesota. He had Justin Jefferson there. And I think it's pretty reasonable to say that while Darnold certainly had a great year, no question, he made himself some money, he boosted his reputation, no question. There are going to be a lot of questions about Darnold this year in Seattle with the Seahawks. And I would like to think we can all agree Justin Jefferson made Sam Darnold a significantly better quarterback. Also, Kevin O'Connor, a guy who really knows what he's doing. That was just a great fit for Darnold in Minnesota. He also had a good defense backing him up as well. But to me, Walter, that's a case of the receiver helping the quarterback more than the quarterback helped the receiver. That's not to undermine or diminish Darnold's achievements, which were substantial. I mean, hey, a 14-3 record in the NFL speaks for itself. But nevertheless, Justin Jefferson, he's the big dog, and having him to go to in crunch time situations, that's going to make a lot of quarterbacks a lot better. So I think that's and obviously it's an NFL reference for college football. You might say, well, it's apples and oranges, but just in terms of the structure, the dynamics of the situation, and the contours of the argument or the thought process, I think that's a natural starting point for, you can make this case that USC's receivers are going to be good. They're going to be top draft picks, even if the coach and quarterback for USC aren't as good as we all hope they will be. So that would be my line of thought, that the receivers could still go high in the draft. Now, that having been said, you look at this PFF list, Lemon at number one, Jordan Tyson at Arizona State, where you have Sam Leavitt, very highly regarded quarterback, Eugene Wilson of Florida, DJ Lagway, expected to be really good, Antonio Williams at 5, Kate Klubnik, Deion Burks of Oklahoma, John Mateer. So you do have pretty credentialed quarterbacks in that room. So I think with the PFF list, for sure, we can probably think that, this analyst, Trevor Sikkema is his name, thinks that Maiyava is going to be pretty good. But I do think it's an open question, and I would also underscore the point that Ethan made earlier. Why is Jacoby Lane not elsewhere in the top 10? So is there a perceived gap between Lemon and Lane in terms of overall quality, or is there a perceived gap in terms of Lemon's skill set fitting Maiyava and the Riley offense a lot more than Jacoby Lane? So that's kind of an interesting point, Ethan Inman. To me, Lemon's more of a speed guy, and Jacoby Lane is a little bit more of the big guy, who can kind of play basketball on grass, can box out a smaller defender, can kind of be the big boy, muscling a defender out of the way to win a contested catch. Maybe the perception is that Mekhi Lemon's speed will get himself open more often, and that's kind of going to be the separator for Jaden Mayava, a guy who hasn't figured it all out. And so the guy who is likely to get open more with his speed, he's going to have the bigger year than the guy with the great hands and who's going to be, perhaps a really good red zone weapon and will get a lot more touchdowns. So Ethan, maybe take a crack at that one. Do you see daylight between Lemon and Lane? I mean, obviously they're both really good in their own ways, but they do have different styles, and maybe that's shaping some of the perceptions here and the differences between these various rankings lists.
Oh, well, there's a lot to say about offensive philosophy for sure. I think, to me, last year, based purely on what I saw last year in terms of like receiver and quarterback chemistry, if I was trying to pick between Lemon and Lane as more of a sure NFL draft pick kind of guy who's going to be at the top of draft boards just based on the chemistry that they developed with Jaden Mayava last year, I would lean Jacoby Lane, just because Jacoby Lane and Jaden Mayava developed something pretty significant, at least in the red zone, where Mayava was really willing to kind of throw it up to Jacoby Lane. And that's really when he racked up all those touchdowns. I mean, you don't really see a lot of seasons for receivers where they have only 500 receiving yards, but 12 touchdowns. Like, that's a really, really interesting stat line. And that's because in the last 3 weeks of the season, he got 7 of those 12 touchdowns. He had 3 against Texas A&M, 3 against Notre Dame, and then 1 on his only catch against UCLA. So I kind of feel like they'd figured that out a little bit, whereas Mekhi Lemons was a little bit more sporadic production, and he produced also when Miller Moss was the quarterback. I remember him having a really good game against Wisconsin. So it's just like, or it wasn't Wisconsin, it was Maryland. That was his first great game. So kind of all over the place. He was also very good against Rutgers. So yeah, just a little bit more sporadic, whereas Jacoby Lane really picked it up at the end. But I do think that has a little bit to do with just the way that USC was playing offense. I mean, they were more willing to take risks, it seems like, with Jaden Mayava, just because they were out of the college football playoff race. And so Mayava was making a lot of throws that I certainly would hope he, was doing just because he knew he could take some risks, and he's not going to take some of those same throws. I mean, we want him throwing deep balls, don't get me wrong, but we don't want him throwing into double and triple coverage, obviously. So I would think maybe you think Mekhi Lemon over Jacoby Lane just because you think that offensive philosophy isn't going to hold up, and it's going to be a little bit more, West Coast offense type, getting the ball out to the edge, shorter passes, getting Mayava in rhythm before you start taking any, deep shots. But I would just think, so yeah, I think that's probably why you would then go to Mekhi Lemon over Jacoby Lane. So yeah, a lot of offensive philosophy to think about. It also really just depends on how the season goes. If you're rolling in the beginning of the season and then you kind of come up on some of these bigger games and you have put a decent season together and you're trying to still compete for a college football playoff, then maybe you're taking less risks. And then someone like Mekhi Lemon gets the ball more, a guy who can not only, be a downfield threat, but like I said, be a threat on the edge and also, maybe run the ball a little bit. He also returned some punts and kicks last year. And then, we've seen how in some of the more meaningful games, Lincoln Riley really froze up in the red zone last year, whereas at the end, like I said, he was willing to take more risks, and that's when we saw those kind of 50-50 balls thrown to Jacoby Lane in games like the Notre Dame game that didn't matter. So I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of different hypotheticals there. I hope they both do great. I hope they both have 1,500 yards receiving and 15 touchdowns each, and that they're just like the best dynamic duo in all of college football, and they go number 1 and number 2. But yeah, I mean, it definitely remains to be seen. And I think the way that the season goes will really determine what we see from them as well, for sure.
Okay, just a couple quickies, not long answer questions, but just statistical questions, and more specifically statistical predictions. I think the conventional wisdom going into this season would be that Mekhi Lemon's going to have more catches than Jacoby Lane, and Jacoby Lane's going to have more touchdowns. Do you agree with the conventional wisdom?
Absolutely. I mean, that's what you saw on paper last year. That is how they compare as, receivers. Someone like Makai Lemon is a guy who you want to get the ball in space, whereas someone like Jacoby Lane is a guy you want to be pretty consistently targeting in the red zone just because of his size and his hands. So yeah, I would think so for sure.
All right. In terms of developing the conversation about the USC receiver room, let's add the other really important element to any discussion about Makai Lemon and Jacoby Lane, and that is the number 3 option. And of course, we can talk about how the number 1 opens up the field for the underneath guys or the less heralded guys, but also if a number 3 receiver steps up, like that will also, one would think, create more open space for the WR1 and 2 to operate in. So if you had to, and this is early bird, right? This is speculative. We're 2 months away from the season, and it's not as though like Lincoln Riley and staff are going to figure everything out, but with that gauntlet of Missouri State, Georgia Southern, and Purdue out of the gate. Like, we're still going to be learning about what works and what doesn't in this receiver room on into late September and early October. So this is an early thing. We're not like, don't treat this as kind of, well, this is definitely how it's going to be. But if you had to make an assessment now, Ethan, who's the best bet to be that third option as a pass catcher who kind of breaks things open, who kind of will stretch the field or will, create openings and will create, diversions for opposing defenses, maybe the linebackers, maybe the safeties, that will enable Lane and Lemon to really rock and roll on the outside with more space, more freedom. If you had to pick one guy, who would that third option most likely be?
Well, I really, really hope it's a tight end, just because I really want to see Lincoln Riley open up the offense for the tight ends this year in kind of preparation for Mark Bowman coming in next year. So I want to see it be. I always kind of root for Lake McCree. I think that he's been pretty consistently underrated, and he's a guy who, when he does get the ball, he looks a lot better than people give him credit for. And he's just had, last year he kind of looked like he was going to be a big factor in the offense. He looked like one of Miller Moss's favorite targets, and then he got hurt, and then Miller Moss got removed. And I don't know if he developed that same chemistry with Mayava when he came back. So he would be the guy I'm kind of rooting for, just because it would be a good indication for our future. And also, it's, Lake McCree's been loyal to USC. He's been there for several years, and he's kind of seemed like he's going to break out a couple of times, but hasn't quite been able to make it happen. So if it's anybody, like, I hope it's him. And then, you got a couple of other guys at the tight end position too, like Walker Lyons and Joey Olson, that could also, if they have a good year, that would be great to see. In terms of the wide receiver position, because I think that's more the question you were asking, my guess would be Prince Strahan, because he's the transfer from Boise State. He just has a lot of experience. He was in an offense that made the college football playoff last year. However you feel about a Mountain West team automatically making the college football playoff, he was still on a college football playoff team, and a team that played, a pretty tough game in the college football playoff too. They looked like they belonged mostly. So yeah, I mean, he's a guy who I would think, just because of the experience. If you want kind of a dark horse, I'd say Xavier Jordan, just because he's a younger guy who's shown some potential, and they've liked in practice and stuff like that. But Strahan as a wide receiver would be my best bet, and then I hope it's Lake McCree.
Yeah, it's really interesting that we're talking about USC's receiver room, but obviously, when ESPN and Pro Football Focus come out with rankings lists, like that's summer talking season catnip, right? Like, you got to go for it. Like, what if you're not going to talk about it now? When are you going to talk about it? So, rankings list came out, but nevertheless, like, do not let this conversation about receivers obscure the point that USC needs to run the dang ball, and that the Trojans need to be able to, pound the rock, do a little student body right, and establish their physical superiority. And then, having done that, then they can take shots down the field, and they can get the home runs. I think, Ethan, this might be another relevant avenue of conversation here at the Voice of College Football. hit your home runs, but do it with men on base. Like, Earl Weaver of the Baltimore Orioles is, long known as, the preacher of the 3-run home run gospel. It wasn't just hitting home runs; it was hitting 3-run homers. With men on base to get maximum return from a big blast. And so, just to kind of use the Earl Weaver, not say analogy, but just like the talking point, uh, is that get guys on base, like get 4 yards, get 5 yards, get 5 yards, get 5 yards, chip away at the defense, and then you're in a position to hit the long ball rather than on 1st and 10 to try and hit the long ball right away. Front end the running game a little bit more in the offense, have more of an emphasis on softening up that underbelly and bringing those linebackers into the tackle box and to set up the deep shot. You don't have to think that you need to go vertical right away. That you need to start trying to hit the haymaker. Just get those body blows in the midsection. Like, does it matter a lot to you in terms of the approach that Lincoln Riley uses to hit that long shot right away, or to pound, 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 pound to set it up? Does it, like, obviously long touchdowns are great no matter when they happen, but like, do you think that the percentages really line up in USC's favor if one approach is favored over another?
I think the best argument that I can think of the approach that you're saying about pounding the rock and then going for the long shots is just kind of the thing that it does to the defense's morale. I think if you're really exhausted and you've been having to play a really physical game, but you've been kind of hanging in there, and like the game is close and USC is winning, but not by a lot, and you've kind of limited USC's running backs enough that you feel like you're competitive, and then the long shots come out, and after USC scored a couple of touchdowns in the game that they've really had to work for, like long 12, 15 play drives, and then all of a sudden they have like a 2-play drive, like it's really, really deflating for the opposing defense. So I think that's a kind of a good argument for that. I think it really depends on the game. I mean, if in some of these later season games, you really, I think, want to be conscious of how your, kind of what kind of psychological games you're playing with the other team's defense, because every inch matters. Every kind of advantage that you can gain matters, especially against these really big, really physical, really talented Big Ten defenses. So, but in some of these earlier games when you're going to win anyways, it's probably a little bit more experimentation, a little bit less caring about what the Georgia Southern defense is getting, is thinking, because they're going to get beat either way. So yeah, I mean,
Well, Ethan, let me step in there. Like, how USC attacks Georgia Southern. Like, should Lincoln Riley be very intentional in terms of how he goes at these early games, which, on paper, USC should win very, very handily? Does it matter how he approaches those games in terms of setting things up for later in the season and not giving, Michigan, Notre Dame, in mid-October too much to look at? Like, should that be part of the calculus in terms of managing those early games in a way that enables USC to really save something for that Michigan Notre Dame double stack in October?
well, yeah, it certainly matters. I think you want to build confidence for some of the younger, less experienced players on your offense. I think you want to figure out position battles. I think you want to really kind of, just work your offensive line, get them up to speed. Yeah, and then I think we've kind of talked a little bit about uh, the scouting that is going to happen by future teams, and I think that my position kind of remains the same, which is that USC probably should be more run heavy in the earlier games, just because that'll be like a little bit easier to establish with these less physical defensive lines, and get guys more experienced, kind of establish that identity for the offense, and get Jaden Mayava comfortable. Like get him some big leads that he didn't have to do a crazy amount of work for, and then let him get in some situations where he can be more comfortable throwing some passes and trying some different things. And so, and then when you're in a situation where you need him to throw the ball, he's a little bit more comfortable and confident because he has more games under his belt. Because this is a guy, like we've talked about several times, is very raw, very talented for sure, but doesn't really have that many big time college football games under his belt. I mean, he came from UNLV, which is not nothing. The Mountain West is a great competitive conference, and they play really entertaining football over there, but it's not the Big Ten. So he's played kind of half a season in the Big Ten. Anytime you get a guy from a smaller conference like the Mountain West and he comes to the Big Ten, there's going to be some mistakes like he made last year, and some adjustment and some nerves, and playing in front of 80,000 people versus the 20,000 that you were playing in front of at Valley Children's Stadium in Fresno, California. But I just think so. Yeah, I think we all want to see USC establish the run game, and that I think is even more important than. And I think that will naturally lead to some of the more creative plays getting buried a little bit in the playbook, because a lot of times if you're going to run a creative play, it's going to be a pass play. But I think even more so than trying to hide some plays or trying to keep it off the tape, I just think they need to do whatever they can to establish the run. And I don't think that we're not like a Texas or a Georgia or a team that's coming off a college football playoff appearance where we can just say like, our players know what they're doing, so we're not going to run any of these plays because like we'll just save them for when we play more complicated teams. I mean, if that happens and we're able to do that, great. But I think even more importantly than that is just getting our guys established, helping them become confident, helping them get some experience playing college football games. And then, like I said, if a natural product of that and running the ball is that some of our more creative pass plays stay in the playbook, then awesome.
All right, folks, we're going to have more on the USC Trojans Primetime Live show here at the Voice of College Football. We're going to talk about USC football facilities. Ethan's going to kind of give us an update on that and a little bit of recruiting. But first, word from our sponsor. So 1 minute break here. We'll be back on the other side.
You can make a difference here at the Voice of College Football. Use the Amazon link. Financially contribute to the Voice of College Football without spending a penny. Same shopping experience. It's easy. Go to any video on any channel. Go to the description section and grab the link right next to the capital letters that say Amazon. Use that link and Amazon will instantaneously convert to your account, settings, history, everything intact, just like whatever link you use right now. No difference. Pay no attention to the product that you see right there. Just go search what you want. Don't forget the Amazon link. Thank you for your support. Sincerely, the Voice of College Football.
All right, we're going to talk about USC football facilities as promised. But first, Ethan, we have our friend Gerardo Zalata, loyal viewer, listener to the show. So Gerardo says, hi, which underclassmen receivers can replace Lemon and Lane if they go to the draft or get injured? Anyone outstanding, or are we waiting for the 2026 class to arrive? Ethan, what's your answer to Gerardo's question there?
I think the 2026 class is going to be really big in that regard. I do think I mentioned Xavier Jordan earlier. He's a redshirt freshman. He's a guy who didn't see the field last year, but it's a guy that they've pretty consistently been pretty high on. So I would anticipate him kind of stepping up and being one of those guys. I would hope that they're able to kind of use him enough this season that he gets some of that experience so that he can step up when they go to the draft. He'd be my number one underclassman. And then, yeah, I think the 2026 class has some dogs in that class as well. And then, like I said, we're also looking forward to Mark Bowman, that 5-star tight end, who is a guy who is a pass-catching tight end. He's not just a guy who is elite blocking and happens to be able to catch the ball. No. This is a guy who is supposed to be a generational pass catching tight end. So he's a guy who it will be a complete travesty if they do not work him into the offense, which is why I mentioned earlier that this year I really want to see them prioritizing more, getting the tight ends involved. I think that that's something that Lake McCree said that they were trying to do last year before he got hurt, and it didn't end up happening. So I really, really, really want to see that happen this year, because if we're not getting Mark Bowman the ball a significant amount of the time, then we're really doing him a disservice.
All right. Thank you for the question, Gerardo. And so, Ethan, the latest on USC's football facilities, that's another thing that you and I discussed before the show, is something we wanted to talk about. So give our audience a sense of what's new and what's really relevant right now.
Absolutely. So about a week ago, they came out with a new update on that. So let me pull that up. It was a post on Instagram and on Twitter. They said the final beam has been laid at the Bloom Football Performance Center. So this is, obviously Kara Folt, Lincoln Riley, Jen Cohen, all in front of the new Performance Center. It's scheduled to open in, I believe, next summer. So it's not going to be ready for this football season, but it'll be ready for next football season when, coincidentally, all of those big recruits are coming in. Seems like pretty good timing to me. But yeah, I mean, I think this shows that the construction's on schedule. It seems to be pretty structurally done, and now they just have to add some of the finer touches. There's a lot of construction going on in the sports world at the USC campus right now. I mean, my last couple of weeks of this last semester, I'd walk by the soccer stadium every day, and I'd see the baseball stadium all the time, and just feels like for a long time coming for a lot of these sports. There's been, these stadiums that they've been waiting on, and it seems like this next school year is going to be the time for all of them to open, and it's going to be a really exciting time on campus. So I'm looking forward to it. But yeah, this is a good sign. Kind of the worst case scenario in these situations is massive construction delays. So the fact that they have really the foundation set is a good sign that they can get this done on time, and it'll be open in time for next year for sure.
Ethan, I think a question a lot of our USC fans and a lot of our viewers and listeners here at the Voice of College Football would be interested in: would all of this be happening, or at least would all of this be happening on this scale with this on this time frame, if USC had not made the move to the Big Ten? Do you think the Big Ten is really was and is a central driver of this, or was this going to happen no matter what? And maybe that means going back 3-4 years in terms of things that happened before Jen Cohen even took over as athletic director. Obviously, she's been an important force in helping these things happen. But some people might think, well, this was going to happen regardless. What's your assessment of that? Just so that our USC fan base gets the straight story on this and why it's happened.
I think this was going to happen regardless, actually. And the reason I think that is just because of the NIL landscape. I think the NIL landscape is really what fueled this more than anything. I think even more than the move to the Big Ten being a program defining moment, the NIL House ruling really was the program defining moment that really kind of set things in motion. And we saw the immediate benefits of that in 2022, and we've had a couple of down years afterwards. But I mean, as soon as the NIL ruling came through, it just felt like a snowball of great things for USC at first, right? I mean, you hire Lincoln Riley, you get Caleb Williams, and then you go on and have that great season. Caleb Williams wins the Heisman, and it's like, wow, USC, as you would anticipate when you're allowed to do brand deals in Hollywood, in the media capital of the world, they are given a massive advantage, and they're able to do all this stuff financially that they weren't able to do before. And then, like I said, last couple of years, it falls off a little bit. I think the Big Ten definitely incentivizes you to do this a little bit because, you're competing more directly with those schools. You want your athletes to have the same advantages that people at those other schools have. But I think even more than that, it was NIL, because I just think it gave the boosters kind of a shot in the arm too, because they saw how much more directly, their donations could really directly impact the football team because players were getting paid. And so I just think that the money has really been flowing in at USC ever since the Lincoln Riley hire, like it hasn't in a long time, because of the belief in Lincoln Riley as a coach, but also because, like I said, you can see the direct impact that you can have. So I think NIL is what did it more than the Big Ten, to be honest.
Looking at that picture with Carol Folt, Jen Cohen, and Lincoln Riley, just looking at that picture, it underscores for me, and people can say, well, don't judge a book by its cover. Don't, people are always smiling for the cameras. It might not mean that everything is hunky-dory, behind the scenes. But I look at that picture, Ethan, and I see, a kind of a reminder of Lincoln Riley is not on the hot seat this season. Like that, they're all standing in front of the football facility under construction. That tells me like we were behind, now we're playing catch up. So even if the 2025 season falls short of expectations, everything's in motion, and we're not going to dump Lincoln Riley like a sack of potatoes after the 2025 season. So like that, this is something that the USC fan base, in my mind, I don't know how prepared the USC fan base is for this. Like, if USC goes 7-5, the pitchforks are going to be out, and it would be justified on the fan base to have those pitchforks out. Like, I would have pitchforks out. I don't know about Ethan. I think you probably would as well. But if he goes 7-5, if USC goes 7-5, I don't think he's getting fired. Now 5-7, yeah. Like, if he doesn't get to a bowl game, if it craters somehow, if it spins sideways, yes, all right. But if it's 7-5, which would be bad, it would be definitely a failure. Barring like an injury to Maeva early in the season or something really cosmically awful. 7-5 would be bad, but like the USC fan base just needs to realize this: Lincoln Riley's not getting fired if he goes 7-5. It would be a failure, but he's not going to get canned because you have all this. You have the 2026 recruiting class. You have Chad Bowden. Like there's just too much infrastructure, too many poker chips pushed into the middle of the table for them to up and quit on Lincoln Riley this year, even if it might be justified. So Ethan, like that I don't think this team is going 7-5. I think the schedule is favorable enough that we won't have to worry about it. But Ethan, if that happens, and I'm not predicting it, I don't think it will happen. But if it does happen, man, it's gonna be really hot in Los Angeles in December.
No, yeah, I mean I took a quick look at the schedule just now, and I think the kind of season that you're describing, them going 7-5, is they obviously lose all of the big three. They lose to Oregon, they lose to Notre Dame, and they lose to Michigan, and then they probably lose to a couple of middling but somewhat dangerous Big Ten teams there as well. My guesses would be Illinois and Nebraska, but I'm not entirely sure. But maybe Iowa, you could trade out for one of those two based on how their season goes. But yeah, I mean, it would certainly be more disappointing than last year. Last year was a year where 7-6, around the same record. It would be either 8-5 or 7-6 again, depending on who they got matched up with and how they did in the bowl game. But it would certainly be more disappointing just because the schedule is so much easier and what to expect so much more from these Big Ten environments and playing these away games and how to deal with the travel schedule and how to deal with the programs that travel well and bring a lot of their fans along with them and all of that stuff. So it would certainly be more disappointing. But yeah, I think you're right. I think as long as USC has a winning season, there's really no doubt in my mind that they keep him for 2026. It's kind of like Josier said there, the 2026 class is too important. And, regardless of who you think played the biggest role in recruiting them, whether that was Chad Bowden, whether that was Lincoln Riley. Some coaching uncertainty is certainly going to drive a lot of them away, and a lot of them, it's not like Lincoln Riley wasn't involved. He was obviously involved in some of those meetings and whatever. I think the only reason that if I'm Lincoln Riley, I have any worries about my job before the 2026 season is over is just that USC has such a good internal candidate to replace him. Because I think the only it only makes perfect sense if it really is a disaster season, like you said, 5-7, to fire Lincoln Riley and replace him with Danton Lynn, because then
you hand him the keys and you get continuity. Yep, absolutely.
You have continuity.
Yep.
You have a lot of those recruits on the defensive side of the ball are less driven away because they're still committing to a coach that they know. He's now the head coach, not the defensive coordinator, but it's the continuity there. I think he really turned the defense around last year. And I think as long as they're even slightly better this year, the confidence in him is still going to be very high. I think the confidence in him is higher probably for most people than the confidence in Lincoln Riley right now. So I just think that is the only reason to be afraid. And that should keep Lincoln Riley at least a little bit accountable to not, kind of phone it in if USC loses a couple of games, and to try to win as many games as he can, regardless of where USC stands in the playoff race. If they lose some early season games, whatever, is just that. Yeah, I think, if it really hits the fan and it's a disaster season, that's kind of a backup plan in USC's pocket. That's better than a lot of schools who, hit that disaster situation would have, is that Dan Lynn is ready to be the head coach of a major conference team right now. And I think that USC would absolutely make that move if disaster strikes, like I said.
Yeah. One of the things you said, you said a lot, all of it good. But one of the things you said about, like USC trying to adjust, bounce back from last season, trying to avoid the underachieving season this year that it had last year. One of the things you touched on very briefly was travel. And that brought up a question I've been meaning to ask you all off season. But like I either didn't think of it or I didn't have the right opening or angle. I have it now just because it clicked in my mind. Last season, I don't know this for a fact, but Tim Prangley and I, when we did our USC show here at the Voice of College Football last year, we seemed to have the sense, again, we didn't confirm this as actual 100% fact, but our sense was that in terms of travel, USC was flying into its Big Ten road destinations, not West Coast, but, Central and Eastern time zones on a Thursday. First off, do you know if that's true or not? And second, if it is true, shouldn't the adjustment this year be to fly in on Wednesday? You can eat another hotel bill. You can, you're USC. You're a big boy program, all right? Spend the extra night of lodging to get acclimated to your new environment. Because, if indeed USC was flying into these Central and Eastern time zone locations on Thursday night, that's barely any time. You have one full day before game day. And so assuming that was true, and again, I don't know, I'm gonna ask you for perspective on this, but if that was true, that was idiocy. And hopefully someone in the football ops department, maybe Chad Bowden, because he would know USC going to Notre Dame, for travel, would really make a difference. So Ethan, first off, do you know that if USC was flying into Big Ten locations on Thursdays, and if it was, you would think that would have to be an adjustment this year in the Chad Bowden era?
Yeah, I heard something very similar to you. I don't have the source, and what the source's credibility was off the top of my head. So, I can't pull up receipts that it was a credible ESPN report or anything, but I definitely heard a lot of rumblings and rumors that they were arriving really much later than you would think to some of these places. And I think that, and it's interesting, especially just because they were always flying so far. It was you go from LA all the way to Michigan, and then back to LA, and then all the way to Minnesota, then back to LA, and all the way to Maryland. It was coast to coast, it seems every week. So you would think and college is weird because, these kids are students. Like, it's easy to forget, especially when now they're getting paid so much money and they're, getting, they're in advertisements now and they're being treated a lot more like professionals, but they are technically enrolled in class. So even if they're not going to class, the perception still matters that they're going to class. So I think that always plays a role in, kind of the travel plans and, keeping their professors happy, because honestly, a lot of them passing their classes in the fall probably has to do with keeping the professors happy and letting them turn in things late and, kind of work on their own schedule and not what the professor's ideal schedule is. So, I'm not entirely sure, but I would think that that's at least somewhat of a factor. But yeah, I mean, if you're a college football player at a major university in the fall, you got to kind of know that the majority of your time is going to be committed to playing football, and especially if, like I said, now that you're getting paid to do it. So I think you can work it into your schedule where you get to these places a day early. And I'm looking at the 2025 schedule now. I just think places like Purdue, it may not matter as much. When you're going to Illinois, like an extra day in Illinois could be the difference for some of these guys. In the it's going to be packed full. There's going to be, and Nebraska is another great example. Illinois and Nebraska are the two games that I brought up pretty consistently as that I see as trap games, because USC is supposed to win them, but they're just teams that were good enough last year, and I think project to be good enough this year, and just have kind of intimidating enough environments, which USC didn't thrive in last year, that they worry me a little bit, as kind of similar games to the games that USC lost last year. And so I think that, like, if you're running on low sleep, suddenly 80,000 fans and the noise of 80,000 fans bothers you a little bit more. And then you get a little bit more nervous, and then it starts to snowball. So yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be a priority every single time. Like I said, going to Purdue, it probably doesn't matter as much. But for the three that I would circle, for Illinois, or four, sorry, for Illinois, actually, no, it is three, because they've traveled to Notre Dame before, so they kind of know how that is and they're acclimated to that. For Illinois, for Nebraska, and for the game in Oregon, which is another place that they've traveled, but Oregon is just kind of a different beast as well. So I guess, yeah, two to four between those games: Illinois, Nebraska, Oregon, Notre Dame. I think Oregon and Notre Dame, they're more used to. So, changing up their strategy there is maybe not something that we'll see. Maybe since they've been traveling there for years, they're a little bit more used to it. They have a little bit more of a plan lockdown. But for Illinois and Nebraska especially, like, I wouldn't take any risks. I'd get there a day earlier. It's further away than a lot of the games that they're traveling to this year. It's going to be a more intense environment. It's just a lot different of an environment too. Like, hanging out in Lincoln, Nebraska is a lot different than being in Los Angeles, California. So you have to get acclimated to that as well. But yeah, I mean, those two games, like, there's really no excuse to be flying in and rushing the players into the game, because the atmosphere is going to really affect them if they're running on low sleep or anything like that.
And so Illinois is late September, Nebraska is, I believe, early November. Like, if it's cold in Nebraska in early November, or if it's really humid and sticky in Champaign in late September, boy, you want those athletes to be more acclimated to the environment. And like Michigan, I don't remember what the temperature was for that game, but it was the middle of September, and it was a blazing sunny afternoon. And of course, Midwest sun is not the same as Southern California sun. So, and you consider, Ethan, Elijah Page, who obviously developed into a really, really good offensive lineman over the course of the season, but he was bad in that Michigan game. And you could perhaps attribute some of that to the crowd, but some of it could have been the environment. Like, he wasn't comfortable. And so the flying in on Wednesday instead of Thursday could be the difference between winning and losing. It could be the difference between having stamina in the fourth quarter and not. It could be the difference between feeling comfortable at the start of a game and not. I would also add the point in terms of the travel and handling this schedule that you made the point about the academic part. if the academic advisors are there and they're still taking classes, wouldn't you want to have 2 days between your arrival and game day, so that one day could be a football day, practice, game plan, walking the field, maybe testing for receivers, testing the angle of the sun at a stadium you don't know. One day's kind of the football stuff, and the other day can be for the academics. If you're flying in on a Thursday, that Friday you're going to have the advisors nattering in your ear. Not to diminish the work or the importance of academic advisors, but just that like they have to do their job. They might have to pester these athletes on the one day you're settled in town before game day on Saturday. If you're flying in on Wednesday, you can just say, hey, academic advisors, you have our players for one of these days, and then it's all football for the other off day before Saturday game day. So logistically, it should be so obvious. And again, Ethan and I, we do not know for a fact that USC was flying into Ann Arbor, Minneapolis, College Park, Maryland on Thursdays, but that was our sense. That seemed to be the chatter, that seemed to be the general point of agreement among a lot of USC watchers. But we weren't tracking the airplanes. Maybe we should this year. We need to get FlightAware or something. But last year it was our sense. So we're not treating this as fact, but it was our sense. And a lot of you other USC fans shared that sense that USC was flying in later in the week, not earlier. That needs to be fixed and dealt with this season. Okay, so Ethan, any other final notes before we close down the show?
Oh, I just think I forgot what I was going to say. You made a really funny comment there about
the academic advisors pestering.
No, it was after that. It was right towards the end. I got distracted by a really good comment here in the chat about sharing NIL with the other sports. I think I don't think that that's going to be the case based on what I've seen, unfortunately. I think that football is getting like 3/4 of it, and then basketball is getting around 4 million, and women's basketball is getting around 1 million, and then everybody else kind of gets table scraps. But I think if a lot of these sports continue to do as well as they've done, and I think the women's soccer program and the baseball program and those programs are in a really good place, it'll start to kind of demand more of the cash. Because those are sports that people care about and are really into. On the beach volleyball note, I think Dane Blanton's going to win regardless. So
yeah,
I don't know. I've talked to him several times, and he's kind of ranted to me about how the gymnastics that it is to figure out beach volleyball scholarships sometimes, but he's just such a winner that he'll complain about those behind closed doors, but then he's also going to go out and compete for a national championship every year. That's just how he is. He's not going to be discouraged by a lack of money. But I still am not remembering. I had a really funny comment on something you said, but I forget what it was.
Okay. Well, maybe you'll remember it in this next minute. I want to do something a little personal here at the Voice of College Football for our USC fan base. And, we don't have some of our familiar faces like Jeff Rodriguez and some of the other people who are longtime listeners. Obviously, it's late June. I'm not expecting everybody to be here. And like all our familiar friends are going to be here in August when we're, talking about preseason camp and so on and so forth. So I know it's kind of a lighter crowd, but nevertheless, I'm about to move. My family's about to move, and that means you need to dig up documents, some documents you need, and also throwing away some documents you don't need. Well, this is a document that I didn't know existed in our house. I was looking for documents pertaining to my father, my late father, but he attended USC in the 1960s. Folks, this is my dad's graduate school Master of Arts in Spanish certificate from June 13, 1963. So 62 years ago, my dad at USC, this is his, you can barely see the print, but this is his USC grade summary from 1960 through 1963. So just a little something from the archives and like tangible proof of my dad's academic journey at USC. So, like I didn't attend the school, Ethan does, but my dad did. And so, like, this is just a document. I had never seen it before, thought you might get a kick out of it here at the Voice of College Football. All right, Ethan, before we close down, did you remember?
I don't know, but I'll start on a little tangent that I was going to talk about really briefly, and then maybe it'll come back to me, which is just that Michigan game, which, yeah, I think because I just remember being so incredibly overwhelmed by the crowd size and, just being in the press box. Like I was at that game in the press box. The windows were up, so I couldn't even get a full sense of the crowd noise. But even I was just like, this is unbelievable. Like it's got to be insane for the players to deal with. And like it made it somewhat understandable when they struggled in the first half, all of that stuff. But you would think that when you go to a place like the Big House, and some of these other places in the Big Ten, you want your players to experience and appreciate that history anyway, because that's like part of the reason why you join the Big Ten is you're competing against all these historic, great college football programs that you haven't gotten to compete against before. So I think that that's almost another incentive to travel a little bit earlier, is just to, like, let these guys tour the school and kind of appreciate the history and appreciate the opponent that they're going up against. And, like especially when they take their first trips to places like the Big House or a place like the Shoe, or, any of these places, like you become even more motivated to go out there and perform when you understand kind of the historic nature of what you're about to do. You're walking in the dreams of a lot of kids that never made it to where you are. A lot of us who end up on the media side had dreams of playing a sport professionally at some point, and that turned into us staying around the sport any way we could. But, a lot of other people that are like that you're getting to walk out in the dreams of. And I just think understanding that fully, like what you're about to go do too, just kind of fires you up and motivates you. So, if the reason why they're not heading out there is because they don't know what to do, like take a day and walk around campus and, all that stuff. I just think any of that just brings more benefit for sure.
Man, Ethan, that's a fantastic point. Like I had not considered that. That's brilliant. Because coaches can speak for forever about, well, this is the tradition of USC and this is how important the game is and this is what it means. But a better teacher is, hey, go inside that stadium, walk around it, and walk around the campus, and maybe like ask students or professors on campus, hey, tell me a Penn State story. Hey, tell me a great Ohio State story. And like that way, like you can appreciate it right from the source. Like what a great insight in terms of getting athletes to cherish these moments. I think the other point you bring up is, if you're getting in relatively shortly before the game without a longer turnaround time, it's all going to go by so quickly. And so when you get on the field, like you want to kind of maximize the moment, but like it's just all spinning, rapidly in front of these players. Arriving early is a way to kind of slow things down, and you're kind of taking a little bit more time. You're being a little bit more intentional about what you do. And that way, when you get on the field, like, hey, I've spent a couple days here. I kind of know what this is about. Not talking about the body's acclimating to the weather. I'm talking about kind of being able to kind of soak up the experience so you don't think that you have to do everything at once, which, like in sports, that also leads to mistakes, trying to do everything at once, like trying to hit the 7-run homer, right? Trying to hit the 5-point shot in basketball, things you can't do. No, you just need to make the one play that's in front of you in a given moment. Arriving earlier slows down the brain. It slows down the calendar. Ethan, like this is why we love your insight here at the Voice of College Football. All right, folks. So Hey, Willie Permort, thanks for the $5 super chat. Everyone else, hey, if you want to do what Willie did, to help our show, to help and show your trust in Ethan, who's just being a rock star for us here at the USC channel, that would be greatly appreciated. Again, Willie stepping up with the $5 super chat. We really appreciate it. Next week, Thursday is July 3rd, so that's right before the 4th of July. And hey, so when the 4th of July is on a Friday, wow, that means a very, very long holiday weekend. You got Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night, on into Sunday. It's basically a 4-day holiday weekend. Well, we're going to be here at the Voice of College Football to get your holiday weekend started off right. So for Ethan Inman, this is Matt Zemek. We hope that to see you next week on our 4th of July show, our July 3rd evening show. Until then, be safe and fight on.